Well, very mixed feelings. Not the hangover that I had last year and took me weeks to recover from G.D. Vance's speech because it came as a rupture. I've been attending the Munich Security Conference for years, and it's about common interests and common values. And last year, we very distinctly realized that it was about American interest first and European values that were different. And that, in fact, there was a gap, and it's a gap that's getting bigger because the MAGA movement is there, I think, to continue. Marco Rubio had a much softer approach, and the standing ovation was not to what he had said, but I picked up, because I was there, a sense of relief that it was not as bad or worse, because that was expected, and there were a lot of talks in advance as to what he was going to say, given that last year Mr. Vance met with the AfD prior to the meeting, refusing to meet with the democratically elected councillor. And Marco Rubio this year is meeting with Mr. Orban, who is indeed Mr. Putin's friend, if Mr. Putin has friends among Europeans. So we see a political agenda from the MAGA movement, which goes counter to what we are, to what we stand for, which is anti-European. And the NSS has been, I mean, it is put in writing, the criticism against the European Union. Mr. Trump keeps also, repeating that he, we are just at the opposite of what he stands for and what he believes our civilization should be. And I think, while a lot of our European partners, when I say that France European partners, are concentrating mainly on defense and security issues, because that's what the conference is about. And having this fear that the Americans may leave us too rapidly or too abruptly, and that we're going to be there left on our own, standing on our own, they do not concentrate on the main issue for me, which is the political one, because we can be undermined from within by having extreme right regimes or governments coming into power. And if they do, that's the end of the Union, and that's the end of, indeed, and I share totally what you have said, the values we stand for. I mean, talking about free speech coming from the Americans, who are 58 on the list today, when the European Union is on the second place. I mean, we don't have lessons to be given by the Americans on that. And yet, I think the political agenda is the one that we should be very worried about. We have Mr. Putin with his threat, but we have, on the other side, the Americans with a different one. And both converge for different purposes. One is territorial, the other one is political, but they converge on making the Europeans weaker, for us maybe to end up being the playing ground for the main powers in the future. We are good customers, and I've said to a few American senators who were there, because there was, a large American delegation, as there is every year. Well, if you make us weak, indeed we need to purchase, and that's what you want. You want us to purchase American equipment. Fair enough. But what do we purchase it with if our purchasing power is decreasing because you keep banging us on the head? And of course, the strength of the European Union is in being in this unity, because be it Russia or America or China, if they deal with any European country on their own, of course we do not stand up to anybody. But as a continent, 500 million, we do. And we do have a financial power which is unequaled, and we have a lot that we're still unaware of, that we are still reluctant to use, but we do have it. And that's what these powers are at. It's to break up this continent as a united one. That's why the European Union is one entity, and it has a financial power, and it has lots of things. But we need to consider the European continent which Britain, Norway, whatever status those countries have, within NATO or not, within the EU or not, it's not. It's 500 million on that continent, and if that continent is under pressure, if it's attacked on its eastern flank, well, it's all of us. It's going to involve all of us, not just those that are at the border. Just about the budget, I mean, now it's, Europe finances 100% of the support to Ukraine, which it did not at the start of the war, which means that in a very short time, indeed, we have passed and put together instruments, financial instruments, safe, 150 billion. Who would have thought 5 years ago that Europe was going to actually put all that money on the table to move forward with defense? We put together the package of EDIP, and we are actually moving...
This happens in spite of Viktor Orban, in spite of Robert Fico,
so
their
we are
position.
actually moving quite rapidly from the way we have moved so far, under huge pressure. And I think, we just need to be confident in ourselves. Now, we cannot do away with our history. We have a number of countries that gained their independence just a few decades ago. And since their independence, have subcontracted their defense to the United States. A lot of them don't even have a commander-in-chief at a national level. It's NATO that does that for those countries. So if you say to these countries, tomorrow the Americans are leaving, of course there is total panic. Because, as you rightly said, we need time to come together and for these countries to do what France started doing in the 1960s, which is quite a long time ago, to decide that, yes, we're going to assume to be strategically autonomous. Strategically autonomous meant not having military personnel from the United States on the French territory, which was the case of a lot of countries, including Germany still, and to invest in nuclear deterrence. We did that at a high cost, but that was the price to pay. So it's much easier for us, of course, today to say we need to be more autonomous and so on, because we've assumed that, and we are at that level, for some time and quite comfortable with it. But we need to be aware that a lot of countries need that catching up. So what I see happening at the moment is that Europe is facilitating the move forward with money, because it does come down to that. Except that sometimes when you have too much money, you buy everything and anything off the shelf, when indeed we should be investing within Europe to boost the European economy, so that we're creating jobs, we're having countries that never had an industrial base and could have one tomorrow. But we are caught in this kind of sprint rather than marathon. And it is most unfortunate, because if we were in a marathon, I would say in 5 or 10 years' time, yes, most countries will have achieved where they need to be. And France, indeed, and it was the criticism I wanted to go back over of France not doing enough. I mean, we have a complete army and we have nuclear deterrence, which costs a lot. Now, if that was to be extended to the rest of Europe with, security guarantees, well, we would expect maybe Europe to partake in it. And then indeed we could invest maybe in other stuff that we do. But we are at 2%, which is the target that we had. We have an increase, and I'm rapporteur for the budget of the equipment of the French armed forces. So I have my nose in the budget and the equipment we use and have and need to purchase. We have an increase of 6.7 billion this year alone, going up to 8 and then 9 billion per year of increase on the current budget that we have. So it is not right to say we don't do enough. And we have this tendency in Europe to always look at the glass half empty. I mean, there's lots of things that we can do with the British, for instance, on the, security guarantees. The Germans are putting 100 billion on the table to bring up their army up to speed and, invest and so on. And most European countries have a part to play. I mean, the Estonians, for instance, are absolutely brilliant. I mean, the Ukrainians are showing what can actually be done in terms of innovation, research, and so on, in a very constrained time. But the Estonians have so much to bring to the rest of Europe on cyber, on information, on intelligence and so on. So, but we do need to get out of this American kind of lid that's on a lot of countries and say, yes, we have this freedom, let's do things together. And it is starting to work on a bilateral and multilateral level within Europe.
Helen,
we need to concentrate on that. To start with, from a defense point of view, I think the Ukrainian army is today possibly the most innovative and possibly the best, having 4 years of war behind them and showing how they can resist one of the most powerful country in the world. Even though that country is showing a lot of weaknesses because they're calling upon Africans, North Koreans, and people coming from around the world to actually fight on the front line.
Just to put in what you're saying, Ukraine makes fastest battlefield gains in the last 2.5 years over the last few weeks. So Ukraine gaining ground, according to the Institute of the Study of War.
And the human loss on the Russian side is just horrendous. It's you know, when the real figures are going to come out, it's just going to be just unbelievable that these young Russian men and the foreigners that are enrolled are being put on the front line to die. And the Ukrainians are resisting, they're fighting back because they're, you know, in that race with innovation. We have both a kind of very conventional, traditional war with trenches, and we have a technical war that relies upon the highest technologies in terms of the use of drones, intelligence, and what the Ukrainians did. I mean, they depleted a lot of the Air Corps, Russian Air Corps, and fleet when they don't have a fleet themselves and when they don't have an Air Corps either. But they were able to do that on Russian territory. So they're absolutely amazing. So the first step is to include them in that. Now, the other process, you're talking about the EU, I mean, that's a different setup. But there are different ways to have Ukraine as part of Europe. And as I say, the British have decided not to be part of the EU. And yet, today, the relationship between Britain and the EU is getting stronger every day because, you know, under American pressure, the British are kind of feeling, well, maybe the Europeans are the ones we want to deal with. And, you know, not having this dependency on the US. So I think we should not mix everything at the same time in the same way as kind of saying, oh, but Ukraine needs to enter NATO or whatever. What we need to do is indeed help all of us for Ukraine to actually come to the table, and indeed the Europeans should be there. But why are they not there? Because they were not invited by the Americans. Because I think Donald Trump felt that with his envoy, special envoy, that he was going to pass deals with the Russians because everything is about a deal.
That was the aim. That was the game, wasn't it? Making money.
What is Gaza about? You know, these peace council.
It's about money.
It's about money. 1 billion on the table, you join the council, and then we're going to have a holiday resort in Gaza tomorrow. So his perspectives are quite different from our long-term perspective, which is to remain in peace on this continent. And indeed, Ukraine needs to not lose that war, because if it does, indeed, there will be other countries after, because unfortunately, that's what the Russian imperialistic ambitions are today and have been very clearly expressed to us. So we need to listen and get the messages right. So we need to defend ourselves, defend Ukraine, and deter as much as we can Russia to actually approach any of us that is in Europe, wherever we are located.
I'm running.